Rain lashed against the pavement as a fragile white cane struck the polished marble steps of the St. Regis Hotel. Inside, New York's most ruthless crime syndicate held court. When she stumbled directly into the Don's chest, the entire room held its breath. Then he whispered a single terrifying word. Lexington Avenue was a cacophony of blaring yellow cabs' frantic curses and the relentless drumming of a sudden torrential downpour. Lydia Hayes tightened her grip on the strap of her BAM Supreme polycarbonate cello case, letting the heavy, familiar weight anchor her against the surging crowd. To be blind in New York City was to navigate a turbulent ocean entirely by sound and touch. To do it during a flash flood was practically a death sentence. Her white carbon fiber cane swept left and right in rhythmic, practiced arcs, but the rising water was quickly masking the tactile feedback of the pavement. Her shoes were already soaked through. Desperation clawed at her throat. She needed shelter, and she needed it immediately. Through the roar of the storm, she heard the distinct muffled hush of heavy revolving doors, and the faint, elegant strain of a string quartet playing a Vivaldi piece. A hotel lobby, guided by the warmth radiating from the building and the subtle scent of expensive lilies and floor wax, Lydia pushed her way through the heavy brass doors of the St. Regis. The immediate silence of the grand foyer washed over her, a stark, comforting contrast to the chaos outside. She paused, shaking the rain from her dark hair, her chest heaving as she tried to orient herself in the vast, echoing space. She didn't know that she had just walked into the epicenter of a war. Less than 50 feet away, Cassian Moretti was descending the grand staircase. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who owned not just the building, but the very lives of everyone inside it. Clad in a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit that clung flawlessly to his broad shoulders, Cassian was the undisputed head of the Moretti Syndicate, the most feared organization on the eastern seaboard. A heavy platinum Rolex Daytona peeked from beneath his French cuffs, a cold testament to his immense inherited wealth. He was flanked by 6 heavily armed men, led by his ruthless underboss, Matteo. They had just concluded a brutal negotiation in a private suite upstairs. A rogue faction from the Romano family had attempted to siphon funds from the Moretti's offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Cassian had dealt with the traitor, personally leaving a broken, bleeding man on the Persian rug of the penthouse. Cassian's adrenaline was still running high, his dark, calculating eyes scanning the lobby for threats. He was a man who trusted no one and forgave nothing. "Bring the armored convoy to the front." Cassian ordered Matteo, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute obedience. "And have the Romano warehouses in Brooklyn burned to the ground before midnight. Leave no witnesses." "Consider it done, boss," Matteo replied, reaching for his earpiece. Cassian took another step toward the exit, his mind already shifting to the logistics of a full-scale mafia war. And then it happened. Lydia, disoriented by the sudden shift in acoustics and the lingering panic from the storm, took a hurried step forward to find a concierge desk. Her wet heel caught the edge of a slick marble tile. She lost her balance, her heavy cello case throwing her violently off-center. She pitched forward, her hands flying out to brace for a painful impact with the floor. Instead, she slammed into a wall of solid, unyielding muscle. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Her white cane clattered loudly against the pristine marble, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous lobby. In a fraction of a second, the atmosphere in the St. Regis shifted from luxurious tranquility to lethal tension. Click, clack. The unmistakable terrifying sound of 6 Glock 19s being drawn and racked filled the air. Matteo and the bodyguards instantly formed a tactical semicircle around their weapons trained directly on the soaking wet girl, who had dared to breach Cassian Moretti's personal space. "Step back!" Matteo barked, his finger tightening on the trigger. Lydia froze her heart, hammering wildly against her ribs. She couldn't see the guns, but she could smell the sudden metallic tang of gun oil and the sharp scent of aggressive aftershave. She could hear the rustle of tailored suits and the heavy, synchronized breathing of men ready to kill. Terror paralyzed her. She was trapped against the chest of a man who felt like a statue carved from granite. Cassian had reacted entirely on instinct. When the figure tumbled toward him, his combat reflexes had flared. But as his large, calloused hands gripped her shoulders to shove her away, he looked down. Time seemed to fracture and grind to an absolute halt. He saw the long, dark hair plastered to her pale cheeks. He saw the panicked, sightless hazel eyes staring blankly at his collarbone. And then his gaze locked onto the delicate crescent-shaped scar resting just beneath her right jawline, a scar he had paid the world's best plastic surgeons to minimize 10 years ago. Cassian's breath hitched in his throat. The cold, calculating mafia, Don, a man who had just ordered the deaths of dozens of men without blinking, suddenly looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His grip on her shoulders softened, shifting from defensive aggression to a desperate, possessive hold. "Boss?" Matteo asked, confusion lacing his aggressive tone. "Give the word." Cassian didn't look at his men. He didn't look at the terrified patrons cowering behind the lobby pillars. His eyes were entirely consumed by the trembling girl in his arms, the girl he had spent a decade watching from the shadows, the girl he had promised to protect at all costs. He leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear, and whispered a single terrifying word that sent a shockwave through the room. "Mine." The word wasn't a claim of property. It was a desperate vow, laced with a decade of hidden guilt and an obsession that defied all logic. The absolute silence that followed Cassian's whisper was deafening. Lydia trembled, her heightened senses rapidly processing the overwhelming stimuli. The man holding her smelled of rich Tom Ford Oudwood rain and the faint, underlying metallic scent of fresh blood. "Put the guns away," Cassian commanded. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried a lethal authority that brooked zero hesitation. "Cassian, we don't know who—" Matteo started. "I said put them away!" Cassian snarled, shooting his underboss a glare so venomous it made the seasoned killer take a physical step back. The sound of weapons being holstered rippled through the lobby. Lydia finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I couldn't see. I slipped. Please just let me get my cane." She tried to pull away, but Cassian's hands remained, firmly, yet gently planted on her arms. "You're not going back out there," Cassian said softly, his tone completely shifting from the monster he had been seconds prior. He reached down effortlessly, retrieving her fallen white cane and pressing it gently into her trembling hand. "Matteo, take her cello. Carefully. It's a late 18th century testore. If you scratch it, I will take your hand." Lydia gasped. How could a complete stranger possibly know the exact make and era of her prized instrument? Before she could protest, Cassian draped his heavy, dry cashmere overcoat around her shivering shoulders. "Walk with me, Lydia." Hearing her own name fall from this dangerous stranger's lips sent a jolt of pure ice down her spine. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" she demanded, trying to dig her heels into the marble. But his forward momentum was unstoppable. He was guiding her through the revolving doors surrounded by a shield of heavily armed men. "I am someone who owes you a debt," Cassian replied cryptically as they stepped out into the storm. A massive black Mercedes Maybach S65 armored limousine was idling at the curb, its rear door already held open by a stoic driver. "I'm not getting in a car with you," Lydia shouted, panic finally overriding her shock. She swung her cane defensively, but Cassian simply caught it mid-air with lightning speed. "Lydia, listen to me," Cassian said, his voice dropping to a desperate, intense register. "Vincent Romano's men are currently kicking down the door of your apartment on West 74th Street. If you go home tonight, you will die. Get in the car." The sheer conviction in his voice, coupled with the terrifying mention of an invasion at her home, shattered her resistance. Numb with shock, she allowed him to guide her into the plush, heated leather interior of the Maybach. Matteo carefully placed the cello case in the trunk before climbing into the front passenger seat. As the heavy armored doors sealed shut, cutting off the noise of the storm entirely, the car merged seamlessly into the chaotic New York traffic. The drive was agonizingly silent. Lydia sat rigidly against the door, clutching her cane like a weapon, while Cassian sat opposite her, his intense gaze entirely fixed on her face. He poured a glass of Macallan 25 from the car's crystal decanter and placed it gently into her hand. "Drink. It will stop the shivering," he ordered softly. She took a small, burning sip, the liquid fire grounding her. "Why is someone trying to kill me?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I'm a cellist. I play at weddings and symphonies. I don't have enemies." "You don't?" Cassian corrected, pouring himself a drink. "Your father did." Lydia's head snapped toward the sound of his voice. "My father, Thomas Hayes, was a corporate actuary. He died in a car crash 10 years ago." Cassian let out a heavy, cynical sigh. "Your father Thomas was a brilliant man, Lydia. But he wasn't an actuary. He was the chief financial fixer for the Moretti crime syndicate. My syndicate." Lydia's breath caught. "You're lying. My father was a good, boring man. He worked in a cubicle. He worked in a secured vault deep beneath the Diamond District." Cassian countered his tone, devoid of malice, only heavy with a grim truth. "He laundered hundreds of millions of dollars for my father. He was a ghost in the financial system, the best we ever had. But 10 years ago, the Romano family found out who he was. They wanted him to turn over the ledgers." Cassian leaned forward, the scent of his cologne enveloping her. "That car crash on Interstate 95. It wasn't a drunk driver, Lydia. It was a Romano hitman named Victor. Your father swerved his sedan to take the brunt of the impact so you would survive in the passenger seat. The shattered glass took your sight, but his sacrifice saved your life." Tears pricked Lydia's unseeing eyes as the buried trauma of that horrific night violently resurfaced. The screeching tires, the shattered glass, her father's final choked gasp holding her hand in the wreckage. "Why are you telling me this now?" She sobbed, the whiskey glass shaking in her grip. "Why ruin my memory of him? Because Vincent Romano just found out that Thomas Hayes's daughter is still alive," Cassian said, his voice tightening with suppressed rage. "He thinks your father left the encrypted ledger with you. They were at your apartment tonight to torture it out of you." The Maybach smoothly pulled into a private subterranean parking garage, the heavy steel gates slamming shut behind them with a definitive clang. "For 10 years I have watched from the shadows." Cassian confessed the vulnerability in his voice, a jarring contrast to his intimidating presence. Lydia's mind raced as pieces of her life suddenly snapped together with terrifying clarity. "The anonymous scholarship to Juilliard," she whispered. "Funded through a shell corporation in Geneva," Cassian confirmed. "The experimental corneal surgeries at Johns Hopkins, paid for in cash," he replied. Cassian reached across the console, his large, warm hand gently enveloping her trembling fingers. He didn't force the contact, allowing her to pull away. if she chose to, but she was too stunned to move. When my father passed, I took over the syndicate. Cassian said, his thumb lightly tracing the knuckles of her hand. I swore on his grave that the debt we owed Thomas Hayes would be paid. I promised to keep you safe. You were never supposed to know about me, Lydia. You were supposed to live a beautiful, ordinary life in the light far away from my darkness. The car door opened, and the cold air of the underground garage rushed in. But tonight the darkness found you, Cassian said, stepping out and offering his hand to guide her. Welcome to 432 Park Avenue. You are standing in the most secure fortress in Manhattan. You will stay here until every last member of the Romano family is eradicated from this earth. Lydia gripped his hand, stepping out of the car. She had stumbled into the St. Regis, seeking temporary shelter from a summer storm. Instead, she had walked directly into a golden cage, held captive by a mafia don who had secretly orchestrated her entire existence. The penthouse at 432 Park Avenue was a sensory fortress, suspended a quarter of a mile above the chaotic streets of Manhattan. For 3 days, Lydia existed within a world of absolute suffocating luxury. Her bare feet learned the topography of heated Afghan silk rugs and cool imported Carrara marble. The air was perpetually climate-controlled, carrying the subtle synthesized fragrance of white tea and fig. Yet despite the opulent comfort, it was a high-altitude prison. Cassian Moretti treated her with a terrifying, reverent obsession. He rarely slept. Lydia could hear the heavy, measured pacing of his handmade Beluti Oxfords on the hardwood floors late into the night. He fed her elaborate meals prepared by a private Michelin-starred chef, provided her with racks of silk loungewear, and spent hours simply sitting in the corner of the grand living room, listening to her play her Testoricello. But beneath the surface of this gilded cage, a mafia war was boiling over. The Romano family, desperate and cornered, was tearing the city apart looking for her. Sirens wailed endlessly from the streets below, a distant symphony of the chaos Cassian was orchestrating to crush his enemies. On the fourth evening, the atmosphere in the penthouse shattered. Matteo burst through the double mahogany doors, his heavy breathing audible even over the sonata Lydia was playing. "Boss," Matteo's voice was tight, urgent. "Vincent Romano just made a move on the Teterboro airstrip. They intercepted a shipment of our heavy artillery. It's a bloodbath. They have our men pinned down in Hangar 4. Cassian cursed the sound of a heavy glass tumbler slamming onto a table, echoing through the room. "Vincent is getting desperate. He knows we are closing the net. I need to be there to coordinate the extraction." "It's risky, Cassian," Matteo warned. "It could be a distraction. I don't have a choice. If I lose that shipment, the Commission will view it as weakness," Cassian snarled. Lydia heard the metallic scrape of him loading a magazine into his customized Sig Sauer P226. He crossed the room, stopping inches from where Lydia sat with her cello. "Lydia," he said, his voice instantly softening, dropping an octave into that possessive tone that made her skin prickle. "I have to leave for a few hours. The building is on total lockdown. The elevators require biometric clearance. No one gets in or out." "Are you going to be safe?" she asked, her voice trembling perfectly, projecting the image of the terrified civilian he believed her to be. "I am always safe, Mia Luce," he murmured, his knuckles gently brushing her cheek. "I am leaving Daniel to oversee your personal detail. He is my top captain. You have nothing to fear." With a sudden rush of cold air and the heavy thud of the reinforced doors, Cassian and Matteo were gone. The vast penthouse fell into an eerie, suffocating silence. Lydia sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the strings of her cello. She focused her hearing, mapping the room. She heard the faint hum of the sub-zero refrigerator in the kitchen, the whistling of the wind against the floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass, and the deliberate, heavy breathing of the man Cassian had left behind. Daniel. He was standing near the entryway. He smelled heavily of cheap tobacco peppermint gum and a distinct underlying odor of nervous sweat. It was the sweat of a man whose adrenaline was spiking. "So?" Daniel's voice finally broke the silence. It lacked the respectful deference he usually displayed around Cassian. There was a cruel, sharp edge to it. The famous Lydia Hayes, the blind princess sitting on a ghost fortune. Lydia didn't move. "Cassian said you were here to protect me." Daniel let out a low, humorless chuckle. She heard the distinct, terrifying sound of a silencer being screwed onto the barrel of a pistol. "Cassian is a fool." Daniel sneered his footsteps, moving slowly across the Persian rug toward her. "He let his obsession with you blind him to the reality of the business. You don't burn down half of New York over a girl. Vincent Romano offered me $3 million and a territory in Queens to open the door from the inside. The Teterboro attack, just bait to get the boss out of the penthouse." Lydia's breathing grew shallow. "You're betraying him." "I'm securing my retirement," Daniel corrected. He was close now. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Vincent doesn't want you dead, sweetheart. Not yet. He wants the ledger your father hid. The master account numbers for the Swiss and Cayman's shell corporations. Thomas Hayes was a paranoid man. He wouldn't just destroy it. He left it with you." "I don't know what you're talking about," Lydia whimpered, shrinking back against the neck of her cello. "I'm just a musician. I've been blind since I was 12. "Cut the crap," Daniel spat, reaching out and brutally grabbing a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back. Lydia cried out in pain. "You're going to tell me exactly how to access those accounts, or I'm going to start breaking those delicate, expensive fingers of yours one by one." Daniel made his first fatal mistake. He assumed her blindness equaled helplessness. He assumed the trembling girl in front of him was nothing more than a fragile victim. He didn't know that Thomas Hayes, a man hunted by the most dangerous criminals on the East Coast, had spent his final years preparing his daughter for the exact moment the shadows finally caught up with her. "Please," Lydia sobbed, dropping her cello bow. Her hand scrambled blindly across the floor, desperately reaching for her white carbon fiber cane lying near the chair. "I'll tell you whatever you want." "That's a good girl," Daniel mocked, loosening his grip on her hair, slightly, his guard dropping as his arrogance peaked. "Where is it?" Lydia's fingers wrapped tightly around the rubber grip of her cane. "The ledger isn't a book," Lydia whispered, her voice suddenly devoid of all panic. The trembling stopped. The tears vanished. Daniel frowned, leaning in closer. "What did you say?" "I said." Lydia's voice turned to ice. "It's not a book, you pathetic amateur." In a blur of motion so fast Daniel couldn't even process it, Lydia didn't just stand up. Tar exploded upward. Using her grip on his forearm as leverage, she twisted her body violently. Her left hand snapped up, driving the heel of her palm directly into the nerve cluster under Daniel's jaw with bone-rattling force. Daniel choked his vision, flashing white as his grip on her hair completely released. Before he could raise his suppressed pistol, Lydia's right hand whipped the carbon fiber cane through the air. Her thumb depressed a concealed biometric button on the grip. With a sharp metallic snick, an 8-inch razor-sharp titanium blade shot out from the tip of the cane. She slashed upward with lethal precision. The blade severed the flexor tendons in Daniel's right wrist. A gurgling scream tore from Daniel's throat as the pistol clattered uselessly to the marble floor. He stumbled back, clutching his heavily bleeding arm in absolute shock. You, he stammered, unable to comprehend that the fragile blind girl had just surgically dismantled him in 3 seconds. Lydia didn't hesitate. her spatial awareness honed by a decade of relying entirely on acoustics and air pressure, was flawless. She stepped forward, sweeping his legs out from under him with a brutal kick to his knee. Daniel crashed onto his back, gasping in agony. Lydia calmly stepped over him, pressing the tip of her titanium blade directly against his carotid artery. "My father didn't hide the ledger, Daniel," Lydia said, her tone as cold and commanding as any mafia don's. "He encoded it. It's hidden in the sheet music of an original concerto he composed for me. I memorized every account number, every routing code, every shell corporation when I was 15 years old. I hold the financial reins of the Moretti and Romano empires in my head." Daniel stared up at her blank, unseeing eyes, absolute terror finally setting in. She wasn't a victim. She was a weapon her father had armed and left behind. "I've known Cassian was watching me for 10 years. Lydia continued, pressing the blade just enough to draw a bead of blood. "I allowed his men to shadow me. I allowed myself to be brought here, because I knew Vincent Romano would eventually try to finish what he started, and I needed Cassian's resources to wipe the Romanos off the map." Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors to the penthouse burst open with the force of an explosion. Cassian Moretti stormed in his suit jacket, discarded his dress shirt stained with blood, his P226 raised and ready to fire. Matteo and 3 guards flooded in behind him, weapons drawn, having realized the Teterboro attack was a diversion, and racing back through the city like madmen. Cassian froze the breath completely, leaving his lungs. The scene before him defied all logic. His fragile, terrified Lydia was standing over his top captain, a bloodied titanium blade pressed to the traitor's throat. Her posture was flawless, radiating a lethal cold authority that commanded the room. "Lydia Fett," Cassian whispered, lowering his weapon an inch, his mind struggling to process the dominant predator standing in his living room. Lydia didn't turn her head. "He sold you out to Vincent Cassian. For 3 million and a slice of Queens. He came for the ledger." Matteo looked at the bleeding, terrified Daniel, then at the blind Cellist, his jaw practically hitting the floor. "Boss." She completely neutralized him. Cassian's shock slowly melted into something far more dangerous. A dark, magnificent smirk spread across his face. The obsession he held for the innocent girl morphed instantly into a profound, terrifying awe for the queen standing before him. "Matteo," Cassian ordered, his voice vibrating with lethal pride. "Take Daniel to the soundproof room in the basement. He gets to live until he tells us exactly where Vincent Romano is sleeping tonight." Then he doesn't. "Yes, boss," Matteo said, roughly hauling the weeping traitor off the floor and dragging him out of the room. The doors clicked shut, leaving Cassian and Lydia alone in the shattered luxury of the penthouse. Cassian holstered his weapon and slowly walked toward her. Lydia pressed a button on her cane, the blade retracting seamlessly back into the shaft. He stopped inches from her, the scent of gunpowder and rain radiating from his clothes. He reached out his blood-stained hands, gently framing her face. "You played me," Cassian murmured, his thumb tracing the scar on her jawline. There was no anger in his voice, only a deep, reverent fascination. "For a decade, I thought I was the guardian angel, protecting a helpless girl in the dark." "I was never helpless, Cassian," Lydia replied, leaning into his touch, a dangerous smile finally breaking across her lips. "You just preferred the illusion. My father was the smartest man in your syndicate." "Did you really think he would leave me defenseless?" Cassian leaned down, his lips brushing against hers in a fierce, possessive promise. "Vincent Romano dies tonight. Every warehouse, every safe house, every remaining soldier with his blood will burn before the sun comes up." "I know," Lydia whispered, her hands sliding up to grip the lapels of his ruined shirt. And when the ashes settle Cassian, we will rebuild this empire together, unseen. Cassian kissed her deeply, sealing a pact forged in blood and deception. New York City didn't know it yet, but the mafia hierarchy had just violently shifted. The untouchable Don Moretti had finally met his match, and the most dangerous person in the criminal underworld was the one nobody saw coming. If you were captivated by Lydia's hidden strength and Cassian's dark obsession, don't forget to hit that like button. We love bringing you these intense stories, filled with unexpected twists, betrayal, and absolute vengeance. Want to see what happens next in the underworld, or have an idea for a new, thrilling saga? Drop a comment below, and let us know. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss a dramatic episode. See you next time.